Hello everyone, in today's video we're going to be taking a look at Bob's and Angels mods. The purpose of this video is to do two things. First of all, it's to answer the question, should you play this? And the second of all is going to be kind of my opinion on my experience. Now was a heck of a project. I've been playing Factorio with my wife for a while now, and this is one of those little games that we always like to kind of play on weekends, sort of a thing, just to sort of enjoy our, a little time. We like to kind of brings us together and finds new ways to be annoyed at things that I really shouldn't be getting annoyed at. So of course, after playing Factorio a bunch of times and kind of playing all these other components, we said, hey, Bob's and Angels seems like a pretty fun game, and we got to it right away. And I don't know how I feel about this mod. Part of me really loved the complexity that it added. The other part of me, of course, could not believe how complicated this mod could be. There's another Factorio mod out there called Pyandons, which is a very interesting take on making things hopelessly complicated. But this was, a jump, especially if you're coming from things like Factorio. So, should you play this mod? Well, let me go ahead and bring up my map for a second here. I do not build mega bases. That's not my thing. But you can take one look from this from a second and realize in our over 100 hours building this in order to get our final rocket launched, you can just see just the sheer volume of stuff required. Now, what you don't see here in this mod that you get a little differently in Factorio. In Factorio, for example, you'd have something that's 200 long. You'd be like, oh, 200 of those. Cool. In this game, every single thing you see is a different building. Many of them are different sizes, and to complicate matters, they're different generations. When I actually open this up, you can see how many tabs they had here. You can see that there are multiple variations of nearly every single thing in this game, which means that, when I go to build, for example, some smelting, then I have this smelting, and look at all the recipes. And here's the scary part. If I open up my research tree, look at this. I've only researched that much. Look at all the stuff we have researched. That's to give you an idea of how staggeringly in-depth this game actually is. Other things that we determined too is when we were playing it, so we found that we kind of like some of the concepts. For example, you could take a raw ore and you could process it down from its raw ore all the way into something that you could use. So coming down here, for example, you can see that they're taking this, they crush it, and then they wash it. Of course, washing it's going to create a bunch of byproducts. In this case, it's going to come up with a bunch of fluoric wastewater. And then from there, you're going to feed it into a leaching plant where you're going to melt it down with hydrofluoric acid. And you're going to feed it into this oil refinery here, which is going to purify it. And then you're going to take it up to the ore sorter. Of course, you're not done yet, though, because once you take it up to the ore sorter, of course, then you have to take that material, which will now split into multiple ores. Another big thing that make Angels and Bob's so different. This is just one of the groups of ores here. You should see what the other ones have. But now you've got 6 different ores here. I think there's something like 18 total. And then you have to do things like where you melt it. Then you can form it. For example, if you want to do rolls, you could punch it out into rolls. And then, of course, you could take the rolls and you could actually break them back down into sheets here. Now, keep in mind, you're using Logistic Truck Network as a mod here in order to make this a little bit more manageable of a game. But you can imagine how challenging that is. But it gets even better than that, because there's not just a couple ores here. There are alloys you have to make. So if I actually float down here, for example, you'll see that of all the ores that we have, you're actually producing massive quantities of alloys. You've got your brasses, you've got your bronzes, you've got everything you could possibly imagine as far as kind of the primaries. And then you have all the variations of cobalt. And you can see here we have all the different ingots being formed. We have to take, some of them require special oxygen, for example, in order to get it out of the atmosphere. So then you have to get rid of the nitrogen, or you can store the nitrogen somewhere. And each one of these has its own ratios. Each one of these has its own set of information. And you can see all these materials. You have no idea when you're going to need them in the game. As a matter of fact, one of the biggest frustrations my wife and I encountered when playing this game, other than not having enough sulfuric acid. Pro tip, by the way, you're never, ever going to have enough sulfuric acid. You just can't have enough. Like, you'll know exactly what I mean when you go to play this game. You might be like, oh, no, I'll be fine. Try it, you'll see what I mean. Is the fact that we have so much of these things that aren't available to us at the beginning, so we end up Mr. Magooing our way through 99% of our first playthrough. One of the things that made this so challenging, and like more so than that I ever think of anything I've ever done in Factorio, is the fact we didn't know what we were doing. We did a bunch of reading, and there's plenty of videos out there that kind of help you out a little bit with this. But there's a reason why you never see somebody's playthrough go from 0 all the way to the end of an Angels and Bob's run, because of how insanely complex this game actually gets. And the fact that I can say that we beat it and actually able to launch the record is one heck of an achievement, in my opinion. Look at, oh man, it's so weird. It's like going back in time when you walk further to the east out here and see the totally different constructed buildings. But like, to give you another idea of how incredible this is, you have all the liquids. Now, if I were to fly over here, for example, I'm not going to pretend this is beautiful or anything like that, because trust me, it is not. When it comes down here, you can see these are all processing, these are all processing. But when it come up here where we actually are extracting oil from the ground and run it through a pipeline, you can just get a concept of just how complicated and how many different gases and fluids you're going to be dealing with at any given time. Not to mention now you've got wastewater you have to treat, and then you have things that are kind of incongruous, such as different types of concrete. If I come here for a landing, you'll look at this and be like, hey, it's concrete. Hey, it's the regular concrete. I'm familiar with this stuff. We use this stuff all the time, which isn't to be confused with this concrete, which isn't used to be confused with this cement, which is, of course, not going to be confused for the reinforced concrete, which is not to be confused with stone, which is not to be confused with slag, which is not to be confused with crushed stone. So it all becomes this incredible, incredible logistical challenge to try to actually put all these things together and actually make them work without actually knowing what it is. Now, as you can probably see from my screen here, there's a couple things I have going for me. The first things first is, is I have my little to-do list here, and that was my last item on my to-do list to get this one to go. The other thing you're probably going to notice is that I have my little planner right here, which is awesome. But if you want to see something real fun here, let me just give you an example. Rocket part. Oh, okay, we go. It's going to give it to me just straight up rocket. That's a control panel. That's not too bad. Well, actually, we'll just take the silo itself just to give you an idea of what you're going up against here. But you can see things like this item, how many different ingredients are now required. So if I come in here, okay, which concrete recipe do you want? Do you want this concrete recipe? Oh, you want to get the nitronol pot. So we need this one. We're going to have to melt that down, which, of course, in order to melt that down, we're also going to have to get this raw, which means we're going to have to get nickel, which means we're going to have to get the ingots for the nickel, which means we're going to pick the recipe for it, which now means we have carbon monoxide we have to get rid of. And this is just for one little aspect of it. Now, if it sounds like I'm complaining, I'm actually not complaining. I really, really appreciated the challenge of this mod. Like, I've never experienced something so in-depth, so complicated. I've played the game Satisfactory, through and through many, many times, but nothing compares to how long it took us, working together. And keep in mind, I've got a lot of hours in this outside of this actual save here, where we were basically experimenting with things on a major grid, and you can see everything's completely seized up here, probably because I'm out of sulfuric acid. Ooh, I'm not out of sulfuric acid, which means this is your new problem. This kind of thing. Because everything produces multiple products that are multiple products, you end up with situations where you can suddenly have an overage of copper, you could have an overage of lead. Lead was our biggest problem in the entire game, by the way. We just couldn't get rid of it. And never have enough iron. You can see even over here, like this is probably some tin, where we have just tons of that ready to go. Now, you're probably noticing that we use the city block system, which we absolutely love. It's very, very simple. But our city blocks weren't big enough. These structures that you're seeing right here are basically the ones that are getting your ores to the point where you can actually cook them. So could you imagine doing that for 6 different elements? And you can see we actually have different generations. Another thing that blew us away when we were playing it was the fact that your initial ore setup, I can actually go fly over there and show it to you real quickly, is, just take some stone, pull it out of the ground, crush it up, and then go ahead and cook the results. So you end up with something that kind of looks like, let's see if I can find it. Yep, right down here. This probably looks familiar to those of you who just play regular Factorio. But in doing so, of course, you end up with a bunch of materials that are wasted. And you end up all this crushed stone, which, of course, you can turn it into mineralized water, and you can clarify it. You can convert it into regular stone. You can convert it into road. We use a logistic truck network for this. But this entire lineup right here, you can imagine, is only producing one kind of item. It's only producing these plates. Everything else we need to go through those other processes in order to obtain. So while this is incredibly kind of inefficient, believe it or not, this particular unit right down here, which is producing these iron plates, was one of the most useful things for the entire game we played, even though this is one of the first structures we built, because it created these plates easily, basically from the very, very beginning. Of course, you had a little bit of a waste issue, which we had to kind of contradict and kind of work with. And all these other ones, of course, we actually took offline with time because the fact is we had too much of this. Now, if we had the ability to actually take these things and convert it into ore directly and then cook that, oh man, would that have been sweet. Instead, like I said, you've got to deal with so many intermediate products. And then, of course, I already showed you a minute ago what it looks like when you start working on some of the later levels and have to start trying to extract things. And then, of course, you get 100 byproducts for each item. For example, each item, when you wash it, gives you a different colored crystal geode. You can take those geodes naturally, and you can crunch them up into these giant crystal slurries. And, of course, if you get too much, you throw it away. But that requires sulfuric acid, too. And then you can take those, and you can precipitate them out. And you can basically trickle in all these really, really rare metals, basically through all this different technology. Now, one of the things I was saying is you'll probably notice when I hold my mouse over this, it's a crystallizer too. There's multiple generations of these, just like you have in regular Factorio. But like I was saying, you can have many, 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 many different versions of each individual component that you're actually going to need. Now, you're probably sitting here going, Okay, that was quite a thorough thing. Thanks for explaining this to me. There's another thing that you don't see here, and that's for the fact that if I actually were to press E real fast to pop up logistics, you'll notice that my basics in this game is this little tiny little belt here. This is a little kind of standard iron plate. This is only a half speed transport belt here. It's a basic one. These are very, very slow and challenging to build at the beginning of the game, and the belts themselves are very, very slow. You get these when you get 10 later in the game. And don't even get me started on when you get some of these other items. And there's actually another tier of belts beyond this. Another thing that absolutely blew my mind was the fact that these inserters, see how you can have these nice little, like a basic electronic boards, you can't get that until you have solder, which means you need half of all of this before you can get your first filter inserter to help cope with all the tremendous amount of stone waste that you're now going to creating. So the burner phase of this game is very long. In the regular Factorio burner phase, you can get through it like in an hour and a half, 2 hours on a good day. This one, it was like 25 hours. It was like almost as long as a standard Factorio run for us. You can see the giant vault mall over there on my left there, just because of all the different items that you required at any given time. And of course, we cheated a bit and used the logistic truck networks, and obviously I've got jetpacks. So my final comment here is we had a couple tools help us out, which made this a little bit easier. People have said this can take up to 300 hours to finish a run on. Now, I'm good, but I'm not great at this game by any means. There's still, I can see this is totally jammed down here. I'd have to go find out why. I can tell you why. There's no sulfuric acid. Sigh. But the reality is without these two tools up here, this is a hell mod, which is fantastic to plan things out. And without the what is this, I don't know how I could have played that. Because otherwise you run into a situation where you're like, oh, I need to build X, Y, and Z. You'd hold your mouse over and be like, electronic steel chest. Okay, how do I make a steel chest? Okay, that's some steel plate. So how do I make straight up? It would just be such a vicious cycle. So now I'm going to get to my final kind of comments here. And should you play this mod? This mod is for folks who really, really enjoy variety. And when I mean variety, I mean extreme variety. One of the things that I'm kind of used to, especially coming from Factorio before we played this, is this kind of thing, where you get columns like this that are 275 long. Yes, you'll notice I don't do any modules when we did this run, only on account of the fact that they didn't make any sense for us because of all the extra research and materials it would suck up in order to do those. Certainly possible, and there's some godlike modules in this one. But one of the things you probably observed as I've been flying around and walking around this whole time is the fact there are so many different arrangements of everything you see. Some people will say, spaghetti, I can't stand it. But that's like the name of the game. You'll notice a lot of our standard kind of setups are different, and they change based on the specific needs of a specific operation that you're doing. Some lend themselves very well to pushing from the outside in. Other items lend themselves really, really well to kind of having the traditional everybody grab something. But one of the things that really, really, really tweaks this mod is if you notice when I click on these, I have a bunch of new inserter ways I can use. And there's actually times where I will use inserters that will push something across a table in order to get to the specific location that it needs to get to. Now, the reason that's so incredibly useful, here's an example of that right here, is if I don't have room here for some reason, like I was doing my city blocks, I can actually just grab things and do stuff like that. So you have these very, very elaborate inserter arrangements that are designed to make your life a little bit easier. The other thing, of course, is the amount of piping. There's probably 65,000 pipes in our world here. It was just staggering when you came down to it. And then, of course, you run into situations like this, where there's so many input components. You have to create these logic, these crazy little pieces here. You can see how many different ones go in here that are basically going to be reaching across and then dumping things back onto it. Plus, they're all different ratios to each other to make it very challenging. So if I were to give this mod a rating, did I appreciate, did I like that I played it? I absolutely 100% appreciated that I got to play this one. Thank God I had such a patient person to do this with, because this caused us to basically want to give up Factorio for life so many times it's not even funny. And like just doing the burner phase of this, you will see, okay, is this ready for me? Is this a slog kind of a thing like that? I really appreciate what they did here. There's a lot of kind of little things that they could tweak. The sulfuric acid stuff is just, it sucks the fun out of the game. And then you get some of the lead, and it's just like, what do I do with the lead? Do I make bullets with it? We're playing without biters, by the way. We chose to do that just because we had no idea what we're up against. But if we had to include biters with all of this that you see here, I don't know how I would play this game. We probably would have quit ages ago because we'd be spending more time shooting those guys than probably taking the time to actually run around and kind of put all our pieces together. I liked it. Would I run off and play it again? I hate to say it, I would say no. If I were to do this again, am I glad that I did it? Would I do it? Would I have done it again? Yeah. But I will not play this again unless I'm in creative mode or something along those lines. There's just so much stuff to it. And now that I know what I'm doing, it still doesn't change the fact it would still take me 100 hours to finish it, just because it takes so much time to just accumulate all the different stuff that you need, put it all in place, get it all moved around. I cannot imagine playing this if you were in a situation where we had all pipes everywhere. You know, if this was I had to use a bus or I had to use trains, I forget it. This would have taken 3 times longer to play this, and we probably would have given up at some point because it's just too much. And one thing you probably also notice is I don't have a lot of things. You know, if I bring up my truck network, for example, you can see everything that is on it very, very clearly. This is just the truck network. You should see the bot network. But you can see just how many things I would have had to have bussed around or processed locally to be able to play this game in a kind of normal Factorio sort of a sense. It's incredible. So for those of you who have, after watching my little review and should you play here, if you're still, I wonder how long that's been broken. I should probably fix that. It doesn't matter. We won. If you're wondering, should you play this game, this is definitely for the people who like a challenge. If you are bored of Factorio, you've got 3,000 hours, and you're ready for something that'll challenge you, this will definitely give you new ways to approach the game. One thing I really liked about it was the fact that it had, not that it was grounded in realism or anything like that, but like the chemistry and stuff, like it made sense. Of course, when you get over to the Angels environmental stuff like you have over here, it gets interesting. And to be honest, I did very, very little of this aspect of the mod, even though you can produce so many products in here without that. You get these really, really fun things like here, like with saw blades, that you have to cut the saw blades, but sometimes you get a saw blade back, sometimes you don't get a saw blade back. Then you have to grow the trees, then you have to get rid of the wood, then you have to send the wood back to the thing, and then you have to keep it. But again, it's all things that people love in Factorio. For those of you who are looking for difficulty, if you want to think of base Factorio as I probably call it a 6 out of 10, this is probably a solid 8 out of 10. I would not put it at 10 out of 10. There's another game, the mod that begins with the letter PY, that belongs there. Crastorio-wise, I'd probably put Crastorio at a 7 out of 10. This is definitely significantly more than Crastorio. It's less than Pyandon's, and I haven't played Space Exploration yet, so I don't know exactly how that one's going to shake out, or Industrial Revolution for that matter, but those are definitely things we'll check out. So hopefully this video helps out folks who are not sure whether or not they want to play this one. Like I said, I liked my playthrough. I won't do it again without creative mode because it was just too much. It was just, it was like if a Final Fantasy game was 3,000 hours to beat single player. You'd be like, I'm enjoying this, but, it just, and then you forgot what you were doing because you hadn't played in 2 weeks. I'm sure you get the feels. Enjoy.